We know the grid is undergoing massive change, which creates massive opportunities for local energy. The Energy Changemakers Podcast offers rich conversations with industry leaders to help you and your company capture opportunities to build the decentralized grid. I'm your host, Elisa Wood. Welcome to the Energy Changemakers Podcast. Hey everybody, Elisa Wood here from the Energy Changemakers Podcast. So here's an interesting story about a gizmo. In fact, the company is called Gizmo Power. Their gizmo is a portable mobile solar EV charging station. But it's not just any EV charging station. You've heard of portable mobile solar EV charging stations before. This is different. It's unusual for several reasons. First of all, it makes use of a location that offers a lot of opportunity for solar, but really isn't taken advantage of much. It's the driveway. This is specifically designed for use in the driveway, and we have a lot of sunny driveways in the US. It's also different in that it is an appliance that you plug in, not a power plant per se. In fact, it's called MEGA, which stands for a mobile electricity generating appliance. Another thing that's unusual about Gizmo Power is that it's a family-run venture run by the Ginsberg-Klemmt family. Daughter and CEO Antonia, who is a mechanical engineer, mother Erika, who handles operations, and father Achim, who is an electrical engineer. They are activist entrepreneurs who started Gizmo Power not to make a lot of money, but to bring energy democracy to those, as they put it, who are not millionaires. They tell their story very well, so I'm going to step back now and let them do so. Here we go. Good morning. Hello to Antonia, Achim, and Erika. It's so nice to have you here today on the Energy Changemakers Podcast. I am excited to talk to you because you have a very unusual and exciting company and product, but also I'm excited because you have an unusual way of managing your company in that the three of you are family members. So today you're on the road, you're at South by Southwest together. So I'm excited to hear about what you're learning, finding in all your ventures. And let's start off by just talking a little bit about how you came to start Gizmo Power.
Oh my goodness. I can chime in telling the beginnings of it. So my joke is we are the Ginsberg-Klemts. Our last name is Ginsberg-Klemmt.
And this is Antonia speaking, by the way.
Yes.
Tell us your role.
Hi, everyone. I'm the CEO of Gizmo Power, and it's so much fun working alongside my parents, and that's pretty much how we all started. Back in 2020, my dad taught me how to weld in our garage, where we welded our very first prototype. Was welding up on a ladder with the assistance of our beloved gravity. And then my mom established the LLC in 2021. And then I won the Aussie Genius Award in 2021, which is essentially for us the feather in Dumbo's cap to make us really realize we could fly. And then that was really proving that there was interest and external interest, not just our own internal family interest in this. And it started out with me parking in the parking lot of my New College of Florida parking lot where they have EV chargers. And I drove my little EV into the physics parking lot and I thought to myself, why aren't there more solar carports here? My dad and I pretty much realized that it's because permanent carports just are so incredibly expensive because of the permitting and all of the red tape that comes in with a permanent system. So our thought is like, what if we just put wheels on the thing? Then it's not permanent, right? Then does that change things? And turns out it changed a lot of things. And then we got a patent attorney as soon as possible. And then we got the system patented and then kept improving the design. And we have so many various different prototypes that were coming up the pipeline at the beginning. And now here we are many years later. But business within a family is challenging because it's a matter of working the home life and then vacation life mixed with business. It's all intertwined. So it's kind of hard to have clear boundaries of when are we working and when are we not working. So that's something
I can imagine. That's got to be difficult. Tell me a little bit about each of your roles, because they're very complementary. What are each of your roles in the company?
Mom, do you want to explain your role?
I like to say that Gizmo Power has a body, mind, and soul. Antonia is definitely the soul of the company. Whether or not Achim is the mind or the body remains to be seen. Let's just say that I have been the messenger. And for example, I've always been very critical about messaging. I did go to UC Berkeley with an emphasis in writing modes, so I studied rhetoric, philosophy, journalism, etc. So I noticed that when Antonia described the product, she brought up the wheels, but she did not mention the plug being a very important aspect of it. So as you can see, I will stay on question. I am Director of Operations. I gave myself that title after I realized that Director of Communications got zero respect out there. So now I am the VP of Operations. That means I'm not an engineer. I have been the messenger, the organizer, the sheep herder.
The person who gets us the grants.
I do a lot of the writing. I do a lot of the interaction with complete strangers. The standing on the street corner saying, you want to take us home? And sooner or later, somebody says yes. And in the meantime, then we have the VP of Engineering, and I will let him have a word.
Yeah, we have also the roles very much. My name is Achim. I'm more electrical. Tony is a mechanical engineer. She has a master's, and I'm the electrical engineer. So it's clear that she has also a design role very much, and I'm very much also involved in what components we're using. It's electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, and Erika does all the important rest of it all because that's the nature of us. It's very complementary. You're totally right.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's amazing. I mean, this is a great trio here. And now let's talk a little bit about the product. Very interesting. So if I understand correctly, it's a solar charger on wheels that can be plugged in. I guess we tend to think about solar sort of as a generation asset, but you've made it into sort of almost an appliance. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Nope, not almost.
It is exactly a appliance. The name of it is called the MEGA, the Mobile Electricity Generating Appliance.
Which also stands for Make America. No, just kidding.
Make electricity great again.
There you go.
Which I have trademarked. You can look it up. It is ours. Make electricity great again. So why an appliance? Because an appliance is a true asset. Think of your refrigerator. Have you ever thought about moving your refrigerator? It does have wheels. How often do you move that fridge?
Never.
Not very often. Why does it have wheels then? Because it's not part of the building envelope for ease of movement if and when you ever needed to. That is the MEGA. Most of the MEGAs that we have out in the field, let's just say all of them, do not move yet. Can they move? They sure can. They can move across a parking lot. They can move across a country. So this becomes an asset that you can own as a money-making appliance. You can have it repossessed if you have a loan on it. You can have it traded. You can have it upgraded. You can have it easily.
It's ideal for renters. If you do not own the roof above your head, then you can still own your own generation and end your lease, move somewhere else, take the power with you is how we've been monitoring it and explaining it. So it's
we also have a number of other expressions such as it's fun to run on sun and solar on wheels.
Coming to your driveway.
So we tend to adopt all good expressions that help folks to understand that generation does not need to be a permitted fixture on a rooftop or ground mount as we have had up until now.
Yeah, I think before this, you and I were talking, and I used the word install, and you said, no, not install.
Exactly.
Just deploy.
It's deployed.
Just deploy. So tell me a little bit about who uses the MEGA.
Anybody with a sunny spot to park in, whether it's a driveway or a parking lot, and anybody who has access to a 240-volt split-phase receptacle on a 40-amp breaker with a dedicated circuit. And don't ask me any more than that when it comes to the electrical requirements.
I was impressed with that. So who are your customers now? Who immediately has shown interest in this?
Yeah, we're right now in several research labs are running it. Then basically tech geeks who have to have the latest and greatest. They were the first adopters that really did it even without interconnect agreements in some cases
But
with the utility. But we have recently deployed the first system that is actually really permitted and approved by the utility is actually with the Lakota chief Henry Red Cloud. He has the first system in Pine Ridge, South Dakota. And the second utility that approved our system, that is a adopter in Las Vegas. It's a private residence and a single-family residence, and we have it in the driveway. And we're even enrolled in a net metering program. So they came out with a safety inspection, and we're part of the net metering, like a rooftop solar system. And we did not need to have a permit beyond just the permit for the receptacle, the outside, where you normally put in your EV charger. It's basically an EV charger with an incidental solar array on it.
When you say the utility approved it, do the systems have to always be approved by a utility? Was that unique to that utility?
Yeah, it's a little bit complicated from a regulatory point of view. Only recently, actually, on February 29th, the first state in the United States passed a law for plug-in solar. And before that, you can only really use the permitting procedure that is there for rooftop solar systems.
And that was Utah, correct?
Yeah.
I would like to chime in there and answer your question a little more directly. The question had to do with, first of all, interconnection agreements. Anybody who stood underneath the mega when we first started establishing our patented design would ask us, well, why don't you just go off grid, put this thing on batteries, and then you can avoid all this mess with permitting? And the answer is, that's exactly what we don't want to avoid. There are reasons why you want to have this thing. You want to interconnect.
You said don't want to avoid. That's a double negative. You don't want to do or want to avoid.
Yeah.
One of those two.
There you go. My daughter doesn't like double negatives. So.
Just to clarify, it's something we were trying to avoid, because also adding a battery, if I may add in, also increases the price and the carbon footprint of the system. So using the grid as a battery decreases the price of the entire system.
You can always add the battery.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, I wanted to say very much in areas with high solar penetration, like California, you have something that's called a duck curve. And the more renewables you really have on the grid, the more battery you actually need because it's an intermittent power source. But if you're in an area like Florida where 95% is gas turbines, the battery you can start thinking about a battery if you have 30 or 40% solar penetration on the grid. But that's kind of a technical aspect that gets overlooked.
It depends on the location.
Yeah.
So just to wrap up the questions, the fact is we do not have any federal jurisdiction over, let's say, interconnection agreements at the local level. Our wonderful federal commission there called FERC has released themselves of any jurisdiction or any authority over interconnection agreements stateswide. So not only do you have various states that have various interconnection procedures and interests, but you have municipalities, etc. So that is very difficult for a product like ours to go ahead, click here, buy now, deploy it, plug it in, and now you automatically have an interconnection agreement. That cannot happen in the United States the way it happens in Germany, France, and some of the other Western countries. So we have to go around from state to state saying who wants us. In the meantime, maybe the new administration, with their bulldozer attempt at running over regulations, will actually be beneficial for us, because perhaps we will find a way to do away with all of these little kingdoms saying you can't interconnect here for no particular scientific reason.
Interconnection is such a huge issue in the entire solar industry. It's,
Yeah.
the fact that we govern our electric system through 50 different states makes it hard for any kind of product that's trying to sell on the national market. So tell me a little bit about then your marketing strategy. How are you going about, how have you gone about making this known?
Well, it's been a lot of different routes. We have identified many different beachhead markets initially. So we were thinking, ideally, of course, homes with existing interconnect agreements with existing rooftop systems. But end game for us, really, what we really, really want is for it to be for the non-millionaires, for renters, for people who do not own a home, to be able to afford this. That will very much have to happen after we're scaling. So we were thinking initially with Solar for All funding for addressing tribal nations and Native American tribes as another beachhead. So down the line, there may be opportunities for partnerships with solar installers, but that's still to be discussed, especially because of the state-of-art manufacturing process. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to also bring up that the regulatory world is very much dictating how we proceed or how we can proceed. Because right now we have only really the opportunity with Native American tribes who have an enhanced authority due to their sovereign nation status. They have more authority over many regulations of adopting codes and things like that than the rest of us in the US. So the Department of Energy under President Biden gave us a grant, a SBIR Phase 2 grant, to establish a new UL standard together with underwriter laboratories.
For generating appliances.
Basically, right now there is no category for grid-tied electricity generating appliances that plug in through a receptacle. And we have this grant, we signed papers with UL, and now we're hopefully starting with them. It's kind of a slow process to get them to wrap their brain around it, that an appliance can actually generate and feed into the grid. So really a bit of a paradigm shift. And that's really this paradigm shift that we really want to accomplish. It started out in Europe with balcony solar. It's written into law in Germany. And now Red Cloud Renewables in South Dakota has gotten the first powerful plug-in system in the regulatory world. And we are very thankful for Utah to having passed the law. It was actually passed by a Republican-led initiative. I want to say that too. And I want to laud these courageous initiatives. And we need to really have a lot of work going on before people can actually go and plug it in to make it as easy as we want it.
But to add in with your question of our business model, we have to be we're very much how to phrase this nice, as we're like an environmental activist company. Like we want our customers to be the ones to make money. In order for that to happen, things need to change on the regulatory end. So we're very much like, we're trying to move the needle.
You are. You really are. The three of you really are pioneers.
It's hard to do with the business. Yeah.
This is a pioneering technology. It's new to the regulatory arena. So, I mean, you're really starting from ground zero. It's very impressive.
Thank you. When people say, you should be the one to set the standard, well, we quite literally are writing a new standard. Like when I was saying,
right now we're hoping to start to write the standard. Yeah. It's kind
of a hard process,
taking too long for my taste.
Elisa, I've found it very funny from the very beginning how when we established our company and we started looking at various non-dilutive channels and options, how many deep tech type of laboratories they are out there, for cold fusion and hot nuclear portable, or God knows all sorts of very high tech stuff. And here we come around with wheels and a plug. And to find your home with that has not always been very easy, simply because people stand underneath it and first say, well, if this works so darn good, then how come somebody else hasn't done it before?
Yeah, you're a good example of why they haven't done it before. I hear this all the time. People say to me, why don't we have this or that? Or why isn't there more solar? And they don't know, they don't understand the hoops you have to go through to start something like that.
Because at the end of the day, this new standard is going to be beneficial to so many other companies. So that way, if they have all the components that make them qualify for a UL standard, then that would mean that their product could be automatic interconnection. So all of our competitors, or like our competing companies, would very much benefit from this standard, but it's too daunting. Mm-hmm. It's a huge hill to climb.
People want to make money. And then there's those who want to make a change. Those are activists over here. You've got your entrepreneurs over there. We're kind of 65% activist and 35% entrepreneur.
So activist entrepreneurs.
And we can afford that.
Mm.
And from what I understand, you're bootstrapping this. You have government support, but mostly you're bootstrapping and you're building these as orders come in. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That's really the safe strategy that we decided to pursue because we don't really want to kind of build 100 system of this here on and put them into a storage and then hope that somebody's going to buy them. We really are just-in-time manufacturing. As the orders come in, you can order a system, we will bring it to you. And it's not going to be with a delivery date that is so fixed. It's going to be when we're done with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned Solar for All funding. We're hearing a lot about funding being disrupted, being delayed. Are you running into any of that with the funding that you're receiving?
We're very lucky to have been blessed with this phase 2 SBIR grant that is pretty much assured through the end of this year. What happens after that, I can't tell you. We are a lean startup. We keep our overhead as low as possible. We try to allocate as much of our grant money, non-dilutive funding, and bootstrapping for the actual brick and mortar solutions on the ground. As I mentioned, we're a family-owned company, so we all work almost 24/7 on it and don't have a lot of employee costs outside of that. That doesn't mean we wouldn't be interested in expanding at some point, but that's the way that we have been keeping it thus far.
Mhm.
I do also want to mention, just give a little shout out that until the end of the year, our funding will allow us to subsidize the costs for obtaining an interconnection permit for any of the brave, early, enthusiastic adopters out there that are willing to go ahead and push their authorities having jurisdiction around them to go ahead and either say yes or no. That is part of our R&D. Other people are sitting in a lab with test tubes seeing whether or not something's going to blow up. Ours is the only testing and validation really has to do with the paperwork going on and the authorities having the jurisdiction over interconnection
Seeing whether or not the
permits.
authorities will blow up.
But if I understood correctly, your question was for Solar for All, is that right?
Yes, I was curious because I'm hearing that those funds have been frozen or delayed.
Yeah, our clients, we have had very good responses from the Native American tribes who we kind of figured they would be really interested in a good beachhead market because of their enhanced authority as a sovereign nation. And our clients have been really hurt by the recent funding freeze, basically. They are very afraid, and in many cases, they're really unsure if they're going to be funded or not. For them, it's an uncertain situation, and we are basically part of in the waiting game now. Are they going to be able to use this or not?
But again, one of the beauties of the mega is that we can find financial products out there, for example, that could serve as a loan, for example. You could pay off your mega. You could have at least still getting an ROI of between 4.5, 5.5, maximum 6 years ROI. That is still a possibility with or without subsidizing or tax incentives. None of us here at Gizmo Power are necessarily financial wizards, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at your electric bill, look at your gas bill, and look at 6 kilowatts of power plugged in. And we've already seen it over and over out there how quickly this thing pays itself off. So that's enough for me. I don't know about you, but I'm sold on it.
So tell me a little bit about the financials. Like, what would it cost me as a homeowner if I wanted to put one of your megas in my driveway?
Yeah, right now, if you order right now, we would charge $24,000.
Mhm.
It would have a small battery backup even integrated and an inverter. And if you want larger battery backups, that'll be more costly. And that is before tax and before incentives. So if you get 30% or 40% tax credit back, it would be 24,000 minus 40% or minus 30%.
And you said battery too, because they don't all have batteries, correct?
Right now, we have these systems that we sold. They have an integrated EV charger, but we're moving towards a system that will have an optional battery. We have upgraded to grid forming inverters from our previous standard setup. The new systems will have a grid forming inverter and an optional battery.
Ah, okay. Oh, interesting.
In the end game, of course, as manufacturing scales up, the price is going to decrease, and we're hoping to get around like 17,500. And then that also, we're all very much component agnostic. So with the supply chain constraint, if there are issues with imports and such, we could use, of course, we want to use the best kinds of panels, inverters, and optimizers out there. But all those prices vary as well. So that's something to keep in mind, that they're not all consistent.
Say I am Erika. I'm not Achim or Antonia. Am I going to be able to easily use this system? Is it simple to use? Do you need to have some sort of engineering background to use it?
We like to believe there's a lot of talk about workforce today. And if you think about what's going on with the residential solar workforce today, you can say whether or not it's healthy, it's unhealthy. We know that there have been a lot of bankruptcies out there for residential installers. This is a product that could potentially give new hope to installers. We believe that they can help non-geeks like you and me to deploy this in their driveways and parking lots. They can, instead of perilously going onto roofs and risking their lives up on steep roofs with belaying tools, etc., they can be building our systems in a climatized place and then deploying them with a trailer. After that, they certainly can support with some information and us having a user manual, just like any appliance, really. And think of how much easier it is to clean, to maintain, to upgrade, to protect, and to troubleshoot when you have the system within a very small stepladder reach, all of the components.
So ultimately, I think what you're saying is you're looking at more of a product that I would go to my solar installer and say, hey, I want this, versus I would go to Lowe's and buy it. Is that correct?
Well, it's going to be a little step towards autonomy, actually, from that. I mean, you're totally right. I mean, how many people feel comfortable moving their refrigerator, like a big refrigerator?
Or installing their own dryer, for example. If
the
your dryer
clothes
breaks,
dryer or whatever,
you're probably gonna...
Some people do, or the range, they're totally helpless with it. And others, they said, oh, well, it's a piece of cake. This is a bit the world that we're going to enter. And we do want to make people more autonomous. But at the same time, the rooftop solar has a lot of soft costs involved. And if you have a future driveway solar company installing like maybe 10 to 20 systems a day instead of one in 2 weeks, you become more effective. And the companies can also tend more towards continued maintenance, because a lot of rooftop solar systems, we have built 2 of our own rooftop solar systems. They have trouble with leaking roofs. And if a component breaks on the roof, it's a big job to kind of replace a component that is just in the middle of an array that's tied to your roof. There's a lot of maintenance costs involved in the current technology with solar that we are just going to be better in terms of continued maintenance of the product and the, quote, deployment of the product. It's really more effective, actually.
So I'm guessing if all goes well, in a few years, I'm going to see a new business out there, new business model called the Driveway Solar Company that's offering
That's
these.
what we want.
Yeah, very interesting. I'm also curious, as somebody who lives in the woods and my roof is really shaded, but I have parts of my land that aren't so shaded. Is this a possible product for those type of people too, who you just can't pull off a rooftop, but maybe you've got some other spot on your property that will work?
I'm going to answer that. We do a lot of customer discovery in the last 3 years. We've been an incubator after accelerator after customer discovery interactions. And the fact is, there's plenty of folks out there who might have a shady driveway, shady roof, but they have a really nice sunny, let's say, backyard or front yard or here or there. That is all fine. I can imagine mobile electricity generating appliances going in other places than the driveway. But you can't be everything to everyone at all times. So we have been focusing on that driveway. That, again, doesn't mean that other options will not be out there and other folks will be able to design something. not meant for the driveway, or let's say for EV bikes or other usages?
I wanted to say that really you need to have three things for the mega. Sun, sun, and sun. And
Yes.
people forget that all the time. People approach us, oh, I have a great driveway, great. And then there's like a 2-story building with a sharp shade on it, and it's facing northward, and that does not work.
Mm-hmm.
Solar panels don't work in the shade. That's very important.
Yes,
Not
that's-
well.
Yeah, but I mean, like we've had people approach us at RE Plus and at conventions telling us that they could see this as like a gazebo kind of situation. Like, oh, I could put a little tea set under it in my backyard. Like, of course, that's possible. But there's actually a research done by UC Berkeley who found that there's actually a larger potential for sunny driveway and sunny parking lot solar than there is for rooftop if you were to go like all out, full scale within the entire United States because of a lot of rooftops being either unsuitable or not the right direction. And
That's fascinating. That's really fascinating
Yeah.
because I think one of the things we talk a lot about in the energy change makers community is the idea that there's kind of this conflict in the industry where some people think we need to really just focus on building large scale wind and solar. And other people are saying, no, let's focus on the rooftops. But you're saying, hey, here's a new place that we haven't been looking at that has massive potential.
and
The
has,
driveway.
that way it'd be multi-use real estate. So
Yeah.
that way it's still used.
I want to also maybe take the occasion to ask a question that comes up a lot. People are going to tell us, oh, you're not going to overload the grid. The overloading the grid is something we should really explore here. The generation on site, the distributed generation doesn't really overload because you're generating. Loads like toasters and ranges and all the electrical appliances that we have today will be compensated on site with on-site generation. So you're not all going to overload anything with you putting a generator on, and you're actually taking load off. It's a minus and a plus misunderstanding, and that happens locally. The electricity that you are generating on site does not need to be transported over the grid. This is really the principal advantage of this technology here.
So what I hear often is the concern about distributed energy is that the distribution grid isn't built for distributed energy, that we are connecting too many things to something that isn't made for this two-way flow of power. It sounds like you're disagreeing with that.
Yeah, I do disagree with that. If you have a large solar field, somewhere you put it somewhere in the desert, well, you need to build not only a dedicated transmission line, you also need a substation, you need transformers. Once you are kind of distributing this into where the loads are, you do not need to transport the electricity at all. And that was my hope that I could
The
make
physics
that
of,
more
you're
clear.
talking about the actual physics
Yeah.
of electricity, right? It's not going
Yes,
to, yeah,
that's right.
right.
These are the laws of electricity that some people want to.
Kirchhoff's law?
Yeah, the Kirchhoff's law is really, it's 8th grade, 9th grade physics. It's really well established since over 100 years, and that's really the principal aspect of this. There is no really grid overloading when you have a lot of distributed generation in place. Right now we have a lot of what is called on the electric grid uncontrolled loads. Your water heater kicks in, well, whenever it's too cold. Now, that's uncontrolled by the utility. Now, if the utility argues that they need to control generation all the time, I argue that has no scientific substance to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. The other thing we talk about a lot in the energy changemakers community is just the general idea of energy democracy. We're a system that consolidates the wealth of energy in one place, and that now as we're becoming more distributed, we have more opportunity for everybody else to share in this wealth. Tell me a little bit about how you see this product playing into that concept of energy democracy.
Well, pretty obviously, I cannot think of a more democratic method of deployment of energy generation than as an appliance. I come into our hotels in an Airbnb and everybody has a hair dryer. The fact is, if you have control over a sunny spot, you can have control over your self-generation. I can't be the first one to use the expression prosumer, but the prosumer model implies already that you are producing and consuming simultaneously. as long as we're going to sit around and at least claim that we're a capitalist society where folks can buy the goods that they want unfettered, as long as it isn't dangerous to others. We have the folks on the right saying, I have the right to own a gun. Why can't we have both sides saying, I have the right to generate my electricity? I don't know how to put it any more obviously than that.
And what's interesting about the mega too, I think, is there's no third party involved, if I understand it correctly. For instance, like in many cases, we've got aggregators or we've got solar companies that perhaps own the product, like paying them a bill, but there's always this third party involved. And it sounds like your concept of the mega is there is no third party. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's really the intent. I mean, we do want to have the future solar companies being more available for the end user on a long-term basis. Because right now, what is missing, a lot of people buy a rooftop solar system, they lose a lot of money because it stops working after a while. Nobody is doing continued maintenance. Something goes wrong, the solar company went out of business. I mean, I've seen really disasters with rooftop solar companies, and we want to really have a company that has a continued maintenance contract that is built in with the business model. But we definitely want to take out the utility, making really the money on the solar. That we are adamantly behind the meter for the end user. And we're also not really so much happy with the aggregator concept that's very much pushed in California by the California state government, where there's another third-party organization that rakes in all the gravy, and then the end user gets 20% or something. And so that's not happy for us.
Mhm.
So we want to avoid anything that's, say, like subscription-based of, like, saying if you're part of a community solar where you can pay for a subscription to a faraway solar field out there. This is something that can be owned. So that way, if there's any third party, it would be on like a need basis if they needed any sort of maintenance happening. If the system is working, functioning fine, they wouldn't have to pay anything external. So it'd be the same as any appliance. If you needed maintenance done on your dryer, you'll call a maintenance guy to come do maintenance on your dryer. It's
Right. I'm thinking my heat pumps in my house. We have a contract with a company that comes once a year and inspects it and checks it and shows up whenever anything's wrong. And
See, like an AC, you have same thing. And we're not really against being part of, for example, a condominium or an apartment or a community that has basically a row of parking spots. And we have actually created a custom version now for the Mega with 8 panels that fits directly smoothly into a 9-foot parking stall. That's the standard width of it. And that is something that we really support, and we can become part of a community solar project. But that exists already. We can be part of these community solar projects and want to be, but we want to have something also new for people who have really the opportunity, like non-millionaires who have an opportunity. Here I have a sunny spot with sun, and I want it there. I can plug it in, and I can really be a renter. That's really what we want. Or small businesses rent their commercial condominiums, and they don't want to put a rooftop solar system on their landlord's roof. That's not happening. The landlord's not happy. They're not happy. But most small businesses have a few parking spots in front of it. And then, why not? That's the idea.
Yeah, and it seems like it would also help with the problem I hear about a lot where, a company or a condo or something wants to put in EV chargers, but they can't because the grid needs to be upgraded. It'd be just too expensive for them to do so. Here they've got this portable appliance that they can use instead.
We are definitely in the market of making it unnecessary to upgrade the grid. That's totally a good feature.
A benefit that we didn't even bother to bring up is if you ever needed to pave a parking lot for whatever reason. A lot of times, if a permanent ground-mounted solar carport canopy system is installed, if there ever needs to be any kind of maintenance to the parking lot, that's a huge deal, and it's likely not even going to happen. They'd have to dismantle the entire carport in order to do any kind of upgrades to the parking lot.
Very good point.
There may also be opportunities for crisis situations. So, for example, one benefit we haven't added yet either is if there is a hurricane, the system can be collapsed and pushed into a garage. It's an appliance that you can keep into safety. It's the dimensions of a garage, and then you bring it back out once hurricane is passed. So that way, but like if in emergency situations, there may be like emergency funding out there for emergency deployment. So if a grid ever goes down, we can have off-grid versions easily deployed.
That's fascinating.
The idea of the mega is you already have the fishing poles in place before disaster occurs. It is a disaster mediating resilience product
Preparedness, yeah.
that you can already have prepared already there in place in places that are vulnerable, so that we don't have to go in afterwards and then deploy.
As Antonia said, you can take it out of the garage then after the storm. And
Yeah,
Exactly. As she pointed out, the birthplace of the mega is Florida, a sunny place for shady people. We attempted a very interesting first interconnection agreement happened in Florida, our attempt. We went in ourselves to get the permit, and they took our paperwork and said, okay, is this rooftop or a ground mount? And the answer was neither. And so the answer to that is, we don't have a box for you to check. Goodbye.
Oh, dear.
And once we went from there, we said, fine, then we're ground mount. Had to take it up to an appeal and had a building official say on record, they are idiots for trying to get this thing connected. Look at that thing. It has wheels. It's not a building, but they require a building permit. That is like putting you in a round room and telling you to pee in the corner. This is not a good place to be when you're trying to get your product into the market. Something else I would like to mention, that isn't just Florida, but nationwide. Something that I have observed, I don't know if you have, Elisa, but the shift away from discussing residential products vis-a-vis, let's say, utility scale products has been remarkable. When I first started in this business and I learned the expression DER, which stands for Distributed Energy Resource, that usually meant a small business, a small residence, or some sort of a small product that was a prosumer model, essentially. You are dispatching when necessary, otherwise you're consuming your own. Well, DER has been taken over. The discussion that we had earlier, you said, yes, interconnection is such a difficult thing. Well, I2X, which is a program that is put on by the DOE, has 100% focused on the problems of interconnection agreements at the utility level, even at the FERC level. What about these interconnection problems? The fact is, because we have not been on the radar until the mega has come along, there is no discussion of interconnection problems at the low voltage level. And that is what we want to bring to the table. When we were allowed to talk about Justice 40 initiatives, and we were talking about disadvantaged communities, underserved communities, historically marginalized, then obviously the Justice 40 initiative wants to get more distributed energy resources into their communities, right? But where are they when we're talking about codes and standards? Where are they when we're deliberating with UL or deliberating with the National Electric Code authorities? That's where we need the activism now if we want to self-generate.
That's a good point. We tend to think about it in terms of funding. We need the funding, but there's so much beyond the funding that is getting in the way.
Exactly.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, I want to underscore what Erika just said. There's a lot of talk about the interconnection queue and the interconnection problems and all that stuff. Well, you know what? Where are you talking about? The high voltage grid? The I2X program was every project had to be above 100 kilovolt. That's the voltage of the grid. That is like a really, really, really high voltage for big transmission lines, in the local areas and where people live. It's like 11 kilovolt or around that. That's like 1/10. And, our home grid, the distribution grid, it's a 240 volt split phase system, or in commercial, it's 208 volt tri-phase. That's a lot lower. And there is none of the problems that really exist on the high voltage grid with the interconnection queue. These problems do not exist on the low voltage distribution grid. And very often permitting agencies or authorities or utilities actually, they exploit people's blurry idea of where the problems are or what the problems are all about. There is no interconnect queue on the low voltage distribution grid. There's a massive potential of interconnecting distributed energy generators to that grid without any problems.
Mhm.
That is something that is being swept under the table, and just to make sure that it's not going to take off and take away from their business.
Yeah. I see that a lot. I absolutely see it a lot. Good. This has been a really interesting discussion. What have we left out? Anything else you want to add?
We're at South by Southwest, and in about 6 hours, we will be in a room with Mark Cuban finding out whether or not we win the Innovation Prize. That's one thing to say. As soon as we leave Austin, Texas, we will be heading for Tucson, Arizona for a Native American symposium on renewable energy.
Not too much later, we'll be at a hackathon in Oakland for open source.
Yeah, that's at
Port Labs.
Port Labs in Oakland. It's the April 22nd,
During Energy Week.
Energy Week and Earth Day.
Yeah,
on
Earth Day.
And for the first time, we have decided to cross the pond and we will be participating in Intersolar Munich
I will be speaking at their plug-in solar
Symposium.
Ah.
Yeah, Tony is a panelist with the top people on plug-in solar in Europe. They invited her as the international plug-in
I was
solar
all excited I was going to be
person.
pitching in German, but they're like, it's international, so you'll be pitching in English. I was like, man.
So, Elise, one more thing I'd like to bring up, even if it's sometimes an unpopular analogy, I think it's an important one.
Mm-hmm.
10 years ago, if I were sitting around the kitchen table and I brought up the idea of marijuana, my young teenage son would say, Mom, be careful. There could be authorities listening. You could be dragged off to jail. Let's face it, 10 to 15 years ago, marijuana was considered felonious and a shameful, scary class 2 drug.
Mhm.
That went from being marijuana, ganja to CBD oil and cannabis very quickly by changing people's minds on what is a useful product. Someone out there took it from a felony to medical and from medical to recreational. And trust me, I can smell it all over South by Southwest. People have decided to use this product.
Mm.
By the same token, we may not be marijuana, but there's folks out there who want to generate their own electricity. If we have to go through the ropes and have it permitted as a permanent structure while we are trying to make the inroads of removing the regulatory barriers, that is what we are intending to do, as opposed to scaling up and selling them like pancakes to the millionaires out there who need it at their pied-à-terre in the mountains of New Mexico or who knows where.
Yeah. And if I may say one last thing, I wanted to mention the Utah legislature and Representative Raymond Ward. I admire him for, at a time where really political world is clashing, he has passed a unanimous bill in the state of Utah to establish plug-in solar. That is, for me, a huge step into the right direction. And he understood what this is all about. And I would really like to have all the state legislatures study HB 340 in Utah and do the same thing in every state. Then people understand what this is all about, you know. The laws of electricity, that they were not established by scientists. They were observed and discovered. The electricity works. Nobody can tell an electron what to do. That's the way it works. And the laws of electricity favor distributed generation. You do not need to build a substation for several $1 million to interconnect a large solar field. You can interconnect directly with a smaller amount or on distributed locations with no problem to the existing grid.
Very good point. I think that's the kind of messaging that's going to bring distributed energy from obscurity to the gummy.
Yeah.
To go back to Erika's analogy.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. It was so funny. I went to the website of the Utah legislature and they have a budget a proposed budget for 2026, 27, and 28, and it has $0 for 2026, $0 for 2027, and $0 for 2028. Because all you need to change is a dumb regulation to make things happen.
You don't need to fund anything. You just need to change the regulation.
Yep, that's right. A little bit of comprehensive reading, and then going back to your 8th grade physics, and then you're in business.
That's great. Thank you so much, Achim, Antonia, Erika. This has just been a fascinating conversation. I wish you the best of luck. Love what you're doing and look forward to following your progress.
Oh my gosh, thank you endlessly.
Thank you
Elisa.
so much.
Thank
This has
you.
been so much fun for us. If
Wonderful.
you can't tell, we could talk about this in our sleep.
You do a good job. Thank you for joining us today on the Energy Changemakers Podcast. I hope today's conversation has inspired you to think differently about the role of distributed energy in our society. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform and consider leaving us a review. You can help us shape the dialogue around energy. Go to energychangemakers.com, subscribe to our newsletter, and join our community. Together, we can make a real difference in how quickly we can make our grid local, equitable, and clean.